Okay, I will start. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'd like to talk about some of the challenges and learnings we made whilst developing Blood and Truth for PlayStation VR. I've got quite a few slides to get through, so hopefully I'll manage to squeeze all this in the time that I have. But first, let me introduce myself. My name's Stuart White. I'm Director of VR Product Development on Blood and Truth. I've been in the industry for 30 years now, having worked at a number of developers, and I've worked on a number of games. But Blood and Truth was, in fact, my very first VR game, so that was pretty exciting. I work at London Studio, and London Studio's got a long history of cutting-edge, innovative titles, from the original Getaway series, which is now 17 years old, for those that remember it, through to SingStar. A fun fact, there's been 115 different SingStar games, which is incredible. Wonderbook and iToy. There's a clear DNA running through the studio of innovation and creativity, particularly with regards to pretty crazy tech, whether that's microphones, cameras, augmented reality, and of course, VR. So Blood and Truth is our most recent release, and it came out in May this year. So I want to talk quickly about the origin of Blood and Truth. So London Studio was involved with PlayStation VR, or Project Morpheus, as it was codenamed from the beginning. The studio created a number of demos during hardware development, and then we enhanced them, packaged them together to make PlayStation VR Worlds, which then, I'm pleased to say, went on to be one of the top-selling titles on the platform. There were loads of different experiences for those that have played it, from street luge through to swimming with sharks, through to being a Cockney gangster in the London heist. And when we looked at the data from VR Worlds, it was clear that there was one experience that was just way more popular than the rest, and that was the London heist. And actually, as an aside, it's kind of funny that both Blood and Truth and Astrobot, which is fantastic, by the way, were born out of launch day games that effectively could be thought of in hindsight almost as vertical slices for the experiences that they became. So VR Worlds was all finished before I joined the studio, but speaking to the team, it was an amazing project to rapidly prototype and learn in this exciting medium, trying lots of different things, experimenting, and something that we've been very keen to keep up ever since. So Heist was very much our original inspiration, but as we developed the Blood and Truth concept further, we decided we wanted to move away from that kind of Cockney gangster vibe and draw our inspirations instead from some of our favorite action movies. And we also wanted to make a full AAA VR game, which of course is the question, what is AAA? So here's the Wikipedia entry. That's my go-to for stuff like this. A lot of time, a lot of resource, a lot of money. That's a pretty good definition of AAA. But I think AAA is dependent on the platform. You know, AAA on mobile is going to be different to AAA on console, different to VR, just due to the relative install bases. But ultimately, AAA for me are big blockbuster titles that really push the platform and create a reason for new people to purchase hardware. You know, the VR install base is going to continue to grow at a solid rate, but I think AAA titles will undoubtedly accelerate this growth. And you know, with any new medium and any new platform, games is a key driver for that sort of stuff. You know, 70% of the revenue on the iOS App Store is games. And this will be true for VR, and doubly true on a platform like PlayStation. So let me give you a quick overview of the game pillars for those of you that aren't familiar with Blood and Truth. Our first game pillar was Be the Action Hero. If you think the gunfights in VR Worlds, the London heist, but dialed up to 11, plus you're no longer fixed to the spot, you can move around environments. And very much inspired by our favorite action movies, films like John Wick, James Bond, Die Hard. And you know, we wanted to make you feel like a badass with moments that feel they could come straight out of your favorite action movie, cinematic slow-mo, and a real desire to amp up our weaponry feel to make it really feel the gun fu. Second pillar was immersive storytelling. A key part for being at the center of your own VR movie is feeling completely immersed in the twists and turns of a dynamic story, as well as interacting with engaging characters. We wanted to make our player-controlled character a Special Forces SAS soldier, and we built a story of family, revenge, and enough twists to keep the player guessing right to the end. We're in VR, so we don't have to confine the drama to camera, and VR brings drama up front and personal. And lastly, our last pillar was modern-day London, the iconic setting for our game. For us, London presents the perfect balance of glamour and grit to help support our varied gameplay and story. London's a melting pot of high-end style, offset with gritty alleyways and derelict buildings, which is perfect for our criminal underworld to inhabit. This pillar also speaks to our music. We're really proud of what our CSG audio team achieved. Our music is very much orchestral movie score meets London grime. And finally, the clue might be in our studio name, but we're obviously a little bit biased, but we think London's a fantastic location for a game. So lastly, here's our launch trailer to give you a flavor of what this looks like combined.
What do I want? Your operation.
It's not going to start an all-out war. It's not big enough.
I'm going to go and find out.
You're just going to walk in there.
Cycles in the streets of London. Cycles in the London zigzag. Cycles in the streets of London. Cycles in something criminal. Today a legend is born. Ready for vengeance rather than war. Ready for anything, ready for war. My English gangster, I'm getting offshore.
We need to push back hard or we're finished.
So that's the game overview. Let's talk about some of the challenges and learnings that we experienced during development. All of the learnings I'm going to talk about are from features and ideas that we added on top of the prototype that was London Heist. But first, I kind of want to talk about the biggest learning that we've had in this period, which is design language. Many established design rules have changed in VR. We've yet to standardize our design language in the same way that the console and PC space have. Game mechanics like control schemes, like the classic PC WASD keys, GUI, cutscenes, camera controls, cutaways. Classic PC and console games have had years to iterate and refine this language. And some of these traditional design approaches really work great in VR and are amplified, and some just don't transition that well. So we're still finding our feet as an industry, on a VR industry, on what works well. I think early VR games were akin to early iPhone games when people tried to port control systems that worked on other platforms to touch to mixed results. And it's not just mechanics, it's also genres. We're going to see new genres appear in the VR space, or reimagining of genres that have died out in the non-VR space. And this is a big challenge for us, as it's not defined, but it's also what makes development so exciting. So I'd like to talk about the rest of our learnings framed around our pillars. So first pillar, be the action hero. For this pillar, we actually managed to find and hire a real-life ex-SAS soldier to help us with making our game feel authentic. Kevin helped write elements of our script, specifically the back and forth between our in-game SAS soldiers, character development, backstory, and also support our actors, particularly Amy Bailey, who played Kayla, on how to bring her character alive in a way that a real-life SAS soldier would know that she was highly trained and very, very dangerous. Kevin actually showed our animation director, Gabor, 7 different ways that he could disarm a common gangster holding a gun at him, which was pretty damn scary. And I think, with that, I mentioned earlier the word authentic, and that was really important to us. But we weren't going for realism. We came up with the phrase, reality through an action movie lens. And the priority was to make the player feel cool. So, for example, we didn't want realistic levels of violence. We wanted to hit the kind of John Wick, Jessica Jones bar. We increased the number of bullets that were in a magazine clip because it's, we didn't want to stick with realism there either. And funnily enough, actually, Kevin actually ended up with a little cameo in our final game. In the opening mission, for those that have played it, there's a back and forth over a military radio with bass. And where we weren't super happy with the actor or the performance of that actor in that scene. So luckily we had Kevin in the office at that day, and we thought, well, if anyone's going to know if this is authentic or not, Kevin will know. And Kevin was like, no, that's shit, mate. So we then basically said, well, Kevin, you've done this before. Do you want to help out? So actually, I mean, talking about authenticity, that military radio operative is an ex-SAS soldier, which is pretty cool. Let's talk about locomotion. Obviously, one of our biggest challenges, and one where we made design decisions that we thought were really true to our pillars. And then we spent the whole of development really nervous that the end consumer just wouldn't get why we were approaching locomotion the way we were. We prototyped a lot in this area. So we needed a locomotion system that was intuitive, simple, and allowed the player to feel like an action hero. We wanted the player to feel in full control as they run across a casino floor whilst under fire and shooting back with 2 guns at the same time, rather than a system that is counterintuitive and makes you feel like Rowan Atkinson in the film Johnny English. It's a bit of a niche reference. We also knew that we wanted to make a game that worked great with the Move controllers. The physicality from the London Heist showed the potential there. Although obviously we also had to support DualShock 4, while the Move install base is increasing, there's still some PlayStation VR owners who've yet to make the leap. Obviously we wanted to make a system that was comfortable. We knew our game could be strenuous, so we optimized around seated play. And we know that looking behind you, whilst it's something that we technically needed to support, isn't super physically comfortable. So we wanted to minimize the requirement to look over your shoulder for gameplay. We wanted a system that didn't have the clunkiness of 90-degree snap turns and all that comes with that. And we also wanted to have a system that was in keeping with our setting and our theme of modern-day London. Teleporting felt to be something that a futuristic game might do, but something that wasn't applicable for what we were doing. So here's a video of our locomotion tutorial we put together for our Paris announce demo. So we've got a nodal-based system. You scan the environment, and you look at a node. You press the move button to move there. We actually vary the walk speed depending on whether the player's in combat or not. In combat, you want to get places quicker. We also vary the speed based on the distance they're traveling. So if a point is really far away, we actually have a higher traversal speed than those that are closer by. And all the locomotion routes are pretty much straight lines. Sideways movement can affect comfort. And similarly, we minimize as much as possible upwards and downwards movement, as that can also be a comfort challenge. But we don't just have on foot. We had things like climbing ladders, going through air ducts, and they all have their own challenges. And even at times, we take control away from the player and force them down rails, which is ideal for chase sequences. And we mix these systems based on design requirements. I think whatever system you end up with, the important thing is to get lots of people to play it. Feedback from people who have different comfort thresholds is key. So one of the changes that we made to Blood and Truth was to add a player inventory. I really struggle with that word. I keep saying inventory, so I'm going to try and get that right. But in London Heist, there was no concept of inventory. The player was routed to the spot, so we had ammo and guns, all within easy reach. But with Blood and Truth, we wanted to give the player an intuitive inventory. Ammo belt here, 2 holsters on the hips for handguns, 2 holsters on the back for larger weapons like shotguns. Reloading is as simple as grabbing an ammo clip from your ammo thing, getting your gun and loading it into your gun. And to holster a gun, just move it to the holster, press trigger. We really wanted it to be simple and intuitive, but it's proved to be really tough to get right. It was really ambitious, and the major challenge for anybody who's worked in VR is we've got a really good understanding of where the player hands are and where their head is as they're tracked, but we don't know anything else. It sounds simple, but as soon as you have a player leaning forward in the world, reaching down to grab something, they could be trying to grab something off a desk, they could be trying to grab something off their player inventory, you kind of enter into a world of pain. Here's actually a video that we put together where we tracked move usage in our game. So in the middle, you can see the PlayStation VR. The green dots is a sampling every 5 seconds of a position check of the left move controller, and the blue dots are with the right move controller. And you can see from this very much that our inventory system is very much pushing the tracking capability of the moves. And to be honest, getting this system right took a lot of iteration. A lot of user testing. We added code to look at angle checks of move controller to make it simple and intuitive to the player. We also had to allow for different body types. Hence, we put in a configuration at the beginning of our game. We had to work hard to minimize situations of people accidentally shooting or moving when they holster or grab ammo. We experimented with the toolkit being manually brought out versus automatically as it was in the final game. And even finally, at one point, we even had the handgun holsters under the armpits and the ammo at belt level. And at times, we started to lose faith in the system and our approach. Hell, we even came so close to shipping a shortcut for reloading on the move controllers using the square button. It was a button that we didn't use on the controller. And it worked perfectly. You just hit square, it reloaded. But we removed this feature weeks before release because the physicality of grabbing ammo, loading it into the gun, is just another thing in our game that really helps immerse the player into the VR world. So inventory was tough, but I'm super proud of the end result. And lastly, our locomotion and inventory system approach created a real challenge around ammo. We knew it was fun to search the environment to find ammo. We wanted to be super generous with ammo. It's not fun to run out of bullets, but technically it is possible to run out. And when you run out, it's not easy to backtrack because looking behind you isn't super comfortable due to our locomotion design. And that was a real problem. So we experimented with things like throwing knives, a backup pistol, and neither worked great. So in the end, we decided to give the player infinite ammo for the handguns so the player would never run out, and then restrict the limited ammo to the more powerful back-holstered weaponry. Oh, precision mode is a great example of a feature that emerged during development. A precision mode is kind of our fancy name for a Max Payne-style slow-mo. We actually had it in our vertical slice as a feature. Thematically, it was a representation of Ryan Mark's, the lead character's, special forces reactions. But we only really used it in a few examples to help with what we called hero moments when you're jumping out of a window or whatever, and also, classic video game of when you shoot red fire extinguishers or red barrels, everything went slow. So we took this vertical slice, which is our casino level, to Paris Games Week in 2017, and people really liked the slow-mo. So we took the feedback back to the office, and we played around with ways to get player-initiated slow-mo into the game, which in the final game is triggered by pressing both move buttons together. And then we further built on this system. Whilst in precision mode, the game can highlight weak spots that can be targeted on like armored vehicles or armored enemies. And finally, we even extended the precision mode timer when the player does cool stuff. It's subtle, but we wanted to reward the player for being cool. So let's talk about pacing and intensity fatigue. So VR amplifies gameplay. A gunfight in a standard console game, which is intense, it can be crazy intense in VR. And pacing is so important, obviously, in video games, full stop. But I think it's because of this immersion, it's doubly important in VR. So you need to have peaks and troughs in gameplay to ensure the player doesn't have intensity fatigue. I think a great example of this that I've used in the past is like, if you're running out of a building that's collapsing around you, 40, 50 seconds of that incredibly intense experience is great. But if you then extend that for 5 minutes, your brain is like, just get me out of here. So we needed to make sure that we had real peaks and troughs in the gameplay. It's not been a massive problem for smaller games, but I think as we move to AAA and longer play sessions, we're going to need to take this into account. So here's our initial intensity curve for the casino level. It starts off slow. There's periods of intense action broken up with lulls where the player gets to do other things. So shooting stuff is fun and really high intensity, but the lower intensity stuff like drama scenes, object interactions, and things even like picking locks are surprisingly impactful in VR. We capped each of our levels at around the 30-minute play length. We wanted to give the player opportunities to take a break. And physical fatigue can still be an issue. You know, we designed around a seated experience, but even with this, certain people can still get tired. So I think the big takeaway here for anybody working in VR is very much think about the user experience and energy levels when making a VR game. And lastly, fun stuff. So VR is a new medium, and it's one that just due to the high level of immersiveness, you can really play with. We added a load of features to our game that have, I think it's fair to say, pretty much zero value from a gameplay perspective. I mean, we were even a bit nervous that how people would react to them. But VR gives you such a tactile feel of the world. We learned that by seeing players' reaction to the cigar in VR worlds. So we started to play with this in Blood and Truth. I think the first thing we added was the ability to pull a grenade pin with your teeth. Then we added gun tricks. Then we added hand gestures. Then adding precision mode gave us more emergent stuff. Throwing ammo in the air, catching in the gun is pretty cool. That's actually a video from one of a Twitter user. That's not from the team at all, but he's got some pretty cool skills. Another video from the internet. This is a Japanese player. Eating cookies is a personal favorite of mine, as you can probably tell. 0 calories in VR, but not as tasty. Yeah, and then a bit of beer as well, always good. Yeah. Oh, Butterfingers. Shooting hoops. That's actually really hard to do in the game. The JK who did that video did that first time, which is amazing. DJ decks, which is super fun. We had smoking a cigar in the London heist, which of course you can still do in Blood and Truth. But we wanted to move with the times, so we added vapes. There are 15 in the game. Each has got a different flavor, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to think that we had this really clever plan around streamers and playing our game. But ultimately, all of these design additions were born out of a team just having the time and opportunity to really explore an idea space and maximize the value it gives. Basically, to us, all of these things were just added to the feel of being immersed in the world and really reinforced that action hero vibe. So our second pillar, immersive drama. For this pillar, we managed to find a real-life, he hates me calling him this, but find a real-life Hollywood producer and director, Rick Porras, to come on board and really help with story and character development. I think it's fair to say that stories in video games aren't exactly always renowned for being great, but action movies don't necessarily need really complex stories, but the characters and stories need to be solid. So Rick had previously worked on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Contact, and Forrest Gump, and when it came to look to someone to help to direct our actors' performances, he was ideally suited. He'd got a lot of experience in this area from being the second unit director on Lord of the Rings, and he knew our character and story really well. So he expanded his role out in Sweden, directing a 26-day motion capture shoot at Goodbye, Kansas. Directing in VR is new. The player frames the action, and the player is the camera. So you can't control where they look, but you're also freed from the camera frame. So you need to ensure that when you're doing a performance capture, all of your actors are in character, the entire scene, as a player can just spend their entire time just concentrating on one actor's performance. Unlike TV, film, or traditional cutscenes, you have to have much more of an ensemble performance. No cuts, no close-ups. It's almost more akin to theater. And, much like video games, we did storyboarding. Storyboarding a sequence for a game or a film isn't anything new. And as you'd expect, we did that. But we found that for some of our action and drama scene blockouts, it was incredibly helpful to take the concept of storyboarding and put it into a headset. And this immersed our creators in a scene in a way that a traditional storyboard cannot. And our in-house engine and tools are all about trying things in headset. It's worth noting that the sooner you can get all members of your team to be able to experience what you're creating in headset, just the better. It really helps guide you on what the important things are to focus on. Let's talk about characters. Our lead character artist, Toby, gave a whole talk of this at GDC last year, which is on the Vault. So I'm not going to go much into this. I think it actually is the second highest rated talk on the VR track, so it's definitely worth checking out. We had a very stylized look to our characters in the London heist, and for Blood and Truth, we wanted to try scanning and photogrammetry. And traditionally, VR games have avoided more realistic character, but we wanted to try it, and we think the approach worked really well. However, it definitely made casting more challenging. Luckily, we had Martin Vaughan at side, who really helped here a lot. And I guess historically, we're used to just hiring good voice actors for a game, but for Blood and Truth, we needed to find actors who looked like our characters, who also sounded like our characters, and were good at physically acting as we motion captured everything. So here's Clarissa Clayton being scanned for Michelle Marks. Here's some of our character heads from 3 Lateral, Tony Sharp, Michelle, and Nick Marks. And definitely, this is a first for me, we even went so far as to actually having a costume buyer in our game. So the costumes and the clothing that our characters wear are actually real, and we have a wardrobe in our office full of flak jackets and suits and all sorts of other stuff. And we even took the opportunity to license some real-world tech, including a pretty scary-looking ballistic helmet from DevTac in Japan. So one of the later additions to our drama tech was one that, on the surface, feels quite minor, which was eye and head tracking.
You had history with Tony? Yeah, we knew. He had his thing, we had ours. But he's never a problem. So why now? I saw an opportunity. An opportunity? On the day of your dad's funeral? That guy's a total asshole. We've done worse. You're right. We have.
So, just going off script for a second, just unfortunately, for anybody who has really played with VR, looking at stuff like this on a video is never the same as when you look at it in headset. So one of the things that you're not getting across from this is that even a slight offset or misalignment of an NPC's eye contact just immediately breaks the illusion. And it feels like that character's talking through you rather than directly at you. And these tiny details matter. And often our animation team are actually tweaking eye lines by a fraction of a millimeter to really ensure the character's eyes feel like they were connecting. And turning this tech on at the end really helped further with grounding the player into our scenes. So in London Heist, for those that have played it, we had a great sequence in a pub where we briefed you on a mission. In front of you, there was all sorts of stuff to play with. Bundle of cash, there was a mobile phone, cigar, lighter. It worked really well. And so we tried similar with Blood and Truth. We started to dot incidental objects, interaction, toys throughout the environment. And then we started to notice a problem. So for example, we had a light tutorial for our CCTV casino section. And we'd located by that tutorial a bunch of scrunched up paper balls, and there was a basket in the corner. And we just found that players were getting so distracted trying to get the balls in the basket, they just stopped listening completely on what to do next. Similarly, in drama scenes, we used beer bottles, vapes, coffee mugs, etc. And again, we just started to find that players just so loved just playing around with shit that they weren't paying any attention to the person that was talking to them. But we also knew that removing them completely was also a problem, as players had an expectation that they'd be there from the London heist. So we struck a balance. We shifted distractions away from the player when we were teaching them stuff. We got rid of those scrunched up balls in that sequence. And within drama scenes, we tried to keep the objects relevant and pertinent to the scene. And we even incorporated objects into the scene. So this is an example just before the art gallery mission.
A new exhibition?
We need to figure out what he's really up to.
Yeah, I'm gonna go and find out.
You're just gonna walk in there? Oh, I got it. Why don't you take a beret and an easel and then you can really blend in?
Yeah, try these. How do I look?
Wait, where did Ryan go?
It was right there. I was just talking to him. Fucking hell, bruv. Ryan Marks, man of 1,000 faces. The teacher that any on.
All right. You need to get into that gallery and see what's happening.
Yeah, I'm on it.
If Tony's there, you know what to do.
Wait, Mum, I just got an...
So not only are we letting the player play with the glasses in that scene, but we're also reinforcing the relationship between the player and the family. And in fact, the glasses just become the catalyst for the scene. One of the features we demoed at Paris Games Week, we demoed at Paris Games Week a feature which didn't make it to the final cut. We had this system where you could, within VR, choose dialogue paths. Here's what it looked like.
Where's Tony? Start talking, you're fucking dead.
Wait, listen, it was all his idea. He wanted to hit the family hard. I tried to stop him.
Bollocks, just tell me.
Shit, you fucking bastard!
Next one goes right between your fucking eyes.
All right, I'll tell you.
That reminds me, I probably should have given a language disclaimer at the beginning of this talk. So we started to hit issues with this approach. I think firstly, it wasn't anything new or original. It was just replicating what a lot of other games do with branching dialogue. And the floating text just didn't feel natural to VR. And our team, while certainly large for VR, was small compared to the AAA production values that we wanted to achieve. And heavy branching of dialogue just has got a big impact on our animation team. Plus, arguably, players start to expect some level of impact and outcome from these decisions, which just further pushes up the complexity. Furthermore, we found that creating these branching dialogue scenes interfered often with the pacing of a scene and the actor's performance. It kind of feels a bit weird, everyone just standing around waiting for you to pick what to say. It kind of works one-on-one, like in that scene there, but as soon as you start putting more people into a scene, the immersion just starts to break. So instead, we wanted to go with player choice branches that are inherently to do with the medium, something that showcased the power of VR. So examples of this is like Carson offers you a handshake, and you can choose to shake his hand or not. Your brother Nick offers you a vape in the car when you first come back to London. And another example, actually, is that scene I showed you a minute ago with the glasses. Here's that scene played out differently, and the branching is completely invisible to the player, so there's no immersion break.
Oh, I got it. Why don't you take a beret and an easel and then you can really blend in?
Yeah, try these.
Ryan, do you want a snack? All right. You need to get in that gallery and find out what's happening.
I'm on it.
And if Tony's there, you know what to do.
why don't you take a parade, an easel, and then you can really blend in?
Yeah, try these.
Try that again. Go on, I dare you.
All right. You need to get in that gallery and find out what's happening.
Oh, I got it. Why don't you take a parade, an easel, and then you can really blend in?
Yeah, try these.
Oi, all right, mate. All right. You need to get in that gallery and find out what's happening.
Yeah, I want it.
Oh, I got it. Why don't you take a parade, an easel, and then you can really blend in?
Yeah, try these.
What do you think? Huh? Undercover special forces?
Idiot. All right. You need to find out what's happening in the gallery.
I'm on it.
Oh, I got it. Why don't you take a parade, an easel, and then you can really blend in?
Yeah, try these.
Oh, you clumsy bastard.
Butterfingers? All right. You need to get in that gallery and find out what's happening.
And so our last pillar was modern day London. For us, the music of Blood and Truth was super important. We wanted to uphold the PlayStation tradition, almost dating all the way back to early PS1 Wipeout era of working with cutting edge music and incorporating that into our game. So we partnered here with Z-Dot, a grime producer, to really help create the soundtrack to our experience. We needed a soundtrack that said both action movie and also London, but also a music track that kept up with the emotions we were trying to evoke at key points in our story. I guess it's also fair to say that many of the dev team were kind of consultants on this pillar, seeing as we all work and live in London. And plus, we have a history as a developer going back to the original Getaway of creating games based in this city. And further to this, it's great to be in the center of London, but it's also challenging from a studio size perspective. The per head cost is high, as you'd expect, and this results in us having to be more creative in how we approach development. So we learned to outsource 90% of the art assets on our game by partnering with external studios, who we developed fully integrated into our tool chain and asset control system. By outsourcing so heavily, it means that we get to keep the feel of being a boutique studio, which is super important to our culture. Driving, so we had a pretty cool proof of concept with our driving section in the London Heist, but we wanted to improve on this. First, we wanted to invest in a tool set to make these sequences much easier to author. The original London Heist was pretty much hard-coded. We wanted to really ground the player more in London, much more so than the London Heist, which you felt more like you were in a corridor almost. And finally, we wanted to move away from the experience being fully scripted, and by adding in physics, really make the whole thing feel much more emergent. In parallel, we'd been pushing on our character fidelity and our world fidelity. And I think it's fair to say driving was a big challenge for us, mainly due to optimization. Having a drama character sitting, right next to you, having a streaming Londonscape, having big explosive action sequences pretty much pushed our engine to the max. And I think the big learning for us here was how much moving away from scripted to emergent really added to the immersion. Physics in VR gave our vehicles a cinematic feel as they jumped over dunes and explosively shot in the air. Our damage system provided player choice by presenting various targets to shoot at. With this system, you can shoot at baddies in the car, you can try and take out the driver, you can shoot at the petrol tank, you can shoot out the tires, you can shoot out the engine block. And if you want, doing all of this using precision mode to chain the weak points for the ultimate action experience. And we still had choreography, of course. We built this into our actors' performance, trying to capture performance capture to amp up the immersion further. And by having these systems, it just really helped bring the driving action sequences alive, and also helped them play out differently each time, which really helps for replay. And lastly, we wanted to set the game in London, but that created a number of technical issues. We knew that for both drama, driving, and some of our action scenes, that we needed to have the real London as our backdrop. Early on, we experimented with the Hollywood approach. We kind of created some matte paintings and created a backdrop from reference photos, but it just didn't look authentic as lighting and perspectives didn't match up. So we actually ended up using a drone. Capture the city from the viewpoint of the Marx family apartment, captured this at 2 times of day, and then painted it over to give the right atmosphere. And that approach worked really well from the Marx penthouse. But for other scenes in the game, we needed to be more 3D. So here, we built the foreground objects in an art package. The midground buildings we got from 3D LiDAR data, and the background was just a painting. And we kind of merged them all together. We fully textured everything in the foreground. The midground, we didn't have clean textures for that, so our technical artist, James Answer, managed to pull out textures from the original Getaway, which is 17 years old, but still worked perfectly for those midground objects. And then even, you might not have seen it at the end, but there was some subtle work there from the VFX team. You got little lights going across the bridge and stuff, which again just helps to add to that immersion. So that's pretty much my talk. I pretty much covered as much as I could, but just kind of give you some final thoughts, really. I mean, I think the first thought is, VR is very much still a very young medium, is very much on the ascendancy. There are more players playing VR today than ever before. And, there's new tech and advancements in the next few years are going to rapidly accelerate this space, which is just super exciting. But even now, the potential of the medium with its first generation is really cool. And I think because of that, there's never been a better time to jump in, either as a consumer or as a developer. There's lots of valuable lessons learned by developers in the last 2.5 years. And the install base has now gotten to a solid number, well, at least on PSVR, helped by big titles like Beat Saber, Tetris Effect, Astrobot, etc. But there's still lots to learn. There's still a lot of design language to still be iterated on over the coming decades. And because it's new territory as well, you really need to push through. And when there's uncertainties, you've just got to keep the faith. So hopefully, some of what I've shown you today gives you an insight of the differences between creating in VR versus traditional game development, and gives you a glimpse into the future of where this medium could be going. Thank you very much. And now, just questions-wise, I've got my Twitter details, London Studio Twitter details. Also, if you are a VR developer interested in hearing more, PlayStation is very excited to talk to you. Please contact John Vega in Third Party or Sony XDev. And Sony XDev publish titles like Rush of Blood or whatever. And with that, I think I've probably got time for a couple of questions. Thank you very much. Oh, okay. How did you deal with level design proportions? Yeah, so Ari Shiraz is our lead level designer. Funnily enough, there is a lot of clever behind-the-scenes stuff that we had to do with our locomotion system, and pretty much, wanting to not rotate the player too much and trying to keep something that on paper can feel quite linear, but you don't want it to feel linear, so we have branching in places. And I think, to be honest, from the conversations I have with Ari, that is a whole talk in itself that he's actually preparing at the moment, I think, for GDC. So, yeah, I think that's a great question. It's very different in VR, and certainly with the locomotion decisions that we made, quite unique, I think. Okay, I think that's it. Unless you've got any more questions. Oh, one more.
Hello?
Hello. I can kind of hear you without the microphone, so it's fine.
Yeah, I was just wondering, there are kind of certain
It's a great question. So I think most of the VR games that I really enjoy is the physicality that VR gives you. They're immersing you in a world when you can pick up objects and you feel that you're grounded in an environment. I think the VR experiences that are really pushing that are the ones that have the real potential for the future. But then, I mean, saying that, things like Tetris Effect are fucking amazing as well, right? So, yeah. It's just, yeah, it's still really early. I think, you know, even when you look at iPhone games and kind of touch games or whatever, you know, obviously, you know, business models have gone a certain direction, but the kind of genres and stuff that are continuing to come out of that space are very unique to that space. And I think in VR, we're going to continue to see new stuff coming out in that regard. Great. All right. Thank you very much.